James chapter 1. We started James chapter 1 2 weeks ago and began with this unbelievable statement that James makes. Count it all joy, he says, when we face various trials in life. And that's just an absurd thought, and so we kind of digested that, we dissected it. Hopefully you've digested it since then. And we just spent some time looking at that. We identified four potential reasons that we tend to find ourselves in the trials of various kinds, the various kinds of trials. It may be because we're just simply human, that we have weaknesses and failures. I thought I was done with this cough. I showed up to Florida. I must be allergic to something down there because the sinuses started going crazy. Like the second I got off the plane, I'm like, really? Are you serious? And here I am in paradise going, it's a minor trial, but it's part of being human. It's just I'm a human guy. And so our bodies will sometimes fail us, and we'll have trials related to that. It might be because we make a poor choice of some sort or a series of poor choices, and we've all done that too. And because of that, there's certain consequences that we face because of our choices. Maybe there is sin involved, and we've all done that too. I sinned, I crossed the line, there's a consequence of that, and now I'm looking at it, and I'm going through some trial, and I'm thinking, why did this happen? Well, it's because I sinned, because God said don't do it, and I did it, and he said, well, I told you. I mean, that's not his approach. That's why he's God and I'm not, because I'd be going like, well, told you not to do that. You didn't believe me. But so sometimes that's why we have our trials. Or it could be a fourth one we identified is sometimes someone else will make a poor choice or sin, and that will affect us. There's consequences to that. So whatever trial we find ourselves in, we're to evaluate our situation, assess it, and count it as joy, is what we talked about 2 weeks ago, because we know our faith is being tested. We know God's doing something in that. Last week, we went a step further and said, yeah, that sounds great, and we might know it up here, but it's another thing to get it down here to our heart. How do I really count it as joy? How do I assess the situation? It stinks and it's hard, it's hurtful, whatever it is, and how do I say, count it as joy without faking it? How do I make it real? And James understood there would be times we would struggle with that, so it's in that context that he tells us to pray for wisdom. Another verse is very familiar to us, but maybe we had never read it in the context of trials, which is what it was written. So if we're struggling finding joy in our pain, he says, pray for wisdom, and I will give without reproach. Well, James says he will give without reproach. So it's like he won't make you feel bad. He won't make you feel like a dummy, like, I can't believe you're praying for this. You're supposed to just count it as joy. He's like, no, I get it. Pray for wisdom. I'll help you see better what's going on. And so that was last week. And I bring that up because it's in that context that we go on to verse 9. It's still the same context. There's no dramatic change. It's still talking about trials, especially when you get to verse 12. He'll kind of wrap it up. Oh, by the way, we're talking about trials, right? So let's read starting at verse 9. Let the lowly brother boast in his exaltation, and the rich in his humiliation, because like a flower of the grass, he will pass away. For the sun rises with its scorching heat and withers the grass. Its flower falls, and its beauty perishes. So also will the rich man fade away in the midst of his pursuits. Blessed is the man who remains steadfast under trials. See, we're still talking trials. Blessed are you, Christian, if you remain steadfast. You're keeping to your faith, right? For when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life which God has promised to those who love him. Now, I was very intentional about spreading this out over 3 weeks because we've all heard these verses on pain before, and we all think, yeah, get it, check, man, James, that's great stuff. Love it, love James. And then we go on, what's the next topic? Okay, I really wanted us to spend some time and digest it and let it sink in and really make it part of our faith, not just something we read before. So we've spent some time in James 1 in this context, really thinking this stuff through. Verses 9 through 12 remind us that everybody, right, not just the poor people or not just the whatever people, everybody faces pain, whether you're poor, what he calls lowly, or whether you are wealthy, those he calls rich. Now, what I don't want to do is play the guilt game where I say, you're all living in America, you're all filthy rich, all right? Because you probably heard that before too. And the reality is we all live in context, all right? We don't need to feel bad because we have more money than someone in Zimbabwe or someone in South Africa. The reality is we live in our own context. I mean, of course you're wealthier than them. Wealth has to do with who you live around. I don't live in a third world country where I can build a house for $400, or $50, whatever. I can't remember what it was. It seems like it was $400 for some of the houses. And it's like, man, I could pay that cash tomorrow. Wouldn't that be great? Just go out and buy your house cash. But we don't live there. Right? For them, that's a lot of money. That's a significant amount of money. I also don't live in San Francisco. This morning, real quick, just for fun, I Googled real estate in San Francisco just to see, well, what comparable? What are houses going for out there? And I mean, I could have looked deeper, but basically, there was a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house in San Francisco that looked pretty modest, like something you'd see around here, that sold for $1.2 million. Okay? To me, I'm like, man, I couldn't afford that if I wanted to. The bank would laugh at me and everything. But I don't live there. In that context, that might be people who don't have very much money, and there's next to the millions of dollars of homes that are around in the area. We live in the Midwest. That house, just again, not being scientific, that I casually looked at online would probably sell for a couple $100,000 here. It was just 1.2 million there this morning. Maybe it's on sale. They'll hear me talking about it, and they'll lower the price. I don't know. The point is, in this church, at Pathway Church, living here in the Midwest, there are families that are living very comfortably, and there are families that are struggling to get by from month to month. Okay? If you go down the street and go to any school within 10 miles of this building, there are some kids wearing $200 designer jeans to school with their $200 shoes and the $55 underwear, and there are other kids on the free and reduced lunches, because they can't afford it. Right? So there's both. We live in the context of both. Some that struggle and some that don't struggle so much. Okay? And James is saying, guess what? Both of you are going to face trials. Rather than sitting there and worry about the other person, well, I don't have what they have, or whatever. It's like you're both going to face trials. If you're alive, you're going to face trials. So James isn't playing the guilt game here either. He's just giving us some perspective. He says, let the lowly brother boast in his exaltation. Again, a kind of a ridiculous statement, just at face value. What do you mean? I have nothing to boast at. I have no money. I don't know where I'm going to eat next week. I don't know when the next car payment's coming. They're going to come and take my car. There's struggles with that. This is the person struggling to get by. There's just not a big cash account going on in your life. You struggle to pay the bills. You have to be really careful to make sure everything gets met each month. It's rough putting food on the table, especially healthy food. Healthy food just costs more, and you're trying to be the best parent you can. You're trying to make that thing happen. So you're struggling. Then some trial comes that is like an extra whammy to your house. The car breaks down. You can't afford a new car. Like, what do? I got to fix the car. That's not cheap. Or do I replace the car? You're balancing that whole thing. Or there's a health emergency. You got to pay for that. The bills come due with that. Or rent goes up. Or you're on a variable mortgage, and the mortgage payment goes up out of your control. Something happens, and it can break you. And it's trial. It's a trial. Rather than letting this torpedo your spiritual life, James says, let this encourage you. You're being exalted. God is exalting you right now. You're being given an opportunity to grow spiritually. It's a perspective change. And I realize it's hard, and maybe that's where you go back to, I got to pray for wisdom because I'm not getting it, that's a possibility. But that's what he's saying here. You're growing beyond where you were before you faced that trial. So you're being exalted. Your faith is being tested. Your hardship is proving to everyone around you that you're a person of faith, that it is genuine faith, that it's real. It's kind of, we didn't really tell anybody about this. We had the truck for the shop last month or whenever it was, and we have this relationship, I guess because we're a return customer far too often, with our mechanic, that if he doesn't have the bill done and says, just take the car, I'll send you a bill, later, and like, oh, okay. So I jump in the truck and drive away quickly before he changes his mind, and then sometime later he'll, in the mailbox comes the bill. So the bill shows up for the truck the last couple of weeks, whenever it was a Saturday. And I opened it up, and it was like $987. And I thought, I even verbally, I don't usually speak when I open the mail. I was like, I don't know how we're going to pay for this. And I kind of sat it down and walked away. And Cheryl's like, great, just ruined her day, great. But it was the next morning we came to church, and you guys had taken a very generous offering, and it took care of it. Thank you, by the way. That was so cool, because I honestly I didn't know. I didn't have that budget. I didn't know what it was going to cost, and so God just kind of takes care of it. It was an opportunity to test the faith. Is it real or not? Are you gonna crumble now? It's like, because you got a bill you can't pay, and what are you going to do? So whether you have much or little, opportunities come through trials to test you and to grow you. Now think about it. Is there anything on earth that you would trade for your relationship with God? Is there anything of earthly value that would say, yeah, I would trade that in? Someone says, I'll give you $1 million. For sorry, what is that? Austin Powers, Freudian slip. I'll give you $1 million if you just deny Jesus. And you'd be like, no. I mean, I'd like $1 million, but no. Or, okay, we're living in a different time now. $1 million's not that much. 500 million, and all you got to do is walk away from Jesus. It's yours. We'll transfer it to your bank account. You're like, would you do it? Hopefully you're not thinking too hard about that. I mean, no. No. $1 billion? I mean, no. Or is there any fabulous house that you would gladly trade for your faith? Well, no. The deeper you understand your faith, the more you realize, like, hey, everything we have is temporary anyway. It doesn't matter. There's nothing I would trade for my faith. There's no way I would trade that for God. Is there any amount of fame or fortune that you would trade so that you could have your faith? If you could choose between a lifestyle of a movie star or just being an average Christian, Cheryl and I struggle with this. Which do you choose? There's no way I would give up Jesus and doing Jesus stuff for fame and fortune. I mean, it's just not even interesting to me. I mean, I would take it if it came, great, but it's like I wouldn't trade it for anything. I know that no matter how challenging life can be at times, as I'm rubbing shoulders with people in poverty, in the other picture in Zimbabwe, that's why I use that one, people who don't make anything compared to what I have, who are literally struggling deeply right now, I wouldn't give anything up for wealth or for fame. So he says the brother who is poor can boast in his exaltation, even in suffering. You know what? I'm gaining something. You know what? One day I'm going to live in this like mansion that Jesus prepared for me in streets of gold. I mean, that's a literal interpretation of the scripture. I don't know what it's really going to look like, but there's nothing this world can give me that even compares to what Christ gives me now or will in the future for eternity. So no, there's no trade-off. He says, and the rich, where the lowly should boast in his exaltation, and the rich in his humiliation. If you have a comfortable lifestyle, you really have pretty much everything you want. You never really worry about if the bills are going to get paid or not. You just wonder, oh, did I pay? Did I remember? I mean, you just don't. It's just not an issue. You don't have to wait till the 15th or whatever the date is. You get paid. The car breaks down a couple times, and it's more of an annoyance than like, man, how am I going to do this? You just think, oh, it's time to get another one. I mean, honestly, I'm right in the middle world. Like, okay, I'm kind of at the point now. It's like, well, how many times does the truck break down? Well, I just get a different thing. I'll just get something different. So I'm well off enough that I can put myself there too, and say, at some point I'll be done playing that game and get a different vehicle until I have to play that game with that. We're doing okay. Well, James reminds us, if you have plenty, well, you have hardships too. You're going to have the same humiliating kind of trials as everybody else. Your body's going to fade no matter how much money you make. If you make poor choices, it will lead to humbling trials. Or if you sin, you'll face consequences just like anybody else. Or other people around you may sin or make poor choices, and you're going to face trials because of what they did. And when you face hardship, you view it as an opportunity to remind you you're not bigger than life. Sometimes the hardest people sometimes to reach for Jesus are people that have plenty because they're thinking, what do I need him for? I got everything I need. And James says, no, there's times in trials you're reminded, actually, you don't have everything you need. You don't have Jesus. You don't have eternity. You don't have forgiven sins and grace. Of course you need Jesus. You're not beyond pain. You're not beyond the trials of mortal man. Verse 11 says, the sun rises with its scorching heat and withers the grass as flower falls. Its beauty perishes. So also will the rich man fade away in the midst of his pursuits. Happens to everybody. Just a few weeks ago, there were several days of funeral conversations and activities with George W. H. Walker Bush, and here's a guy who was a decorated war hero, extremely successful businessman. Whether you agree with his politics or not, he was vice president of the United States of America. Later on became president of the United States of America. He had an impressive life. I mean, he hit the top. I mean, any human being more powerful than the president of the United States? I mean, that very few, if there are. I mean, what else can you do? But even he, a person who had anything he could possibly ever want, was still human and couldn't stop his body from fading away. It happens to us all. Now, you can insert the name of any person of wealth over the years: kings, queens, movie stars, athletes, presidents, businessmen, businesswomen. I mean, it happens to us all. Verse 10 is talking about the wealthy believer being brought low by trials and finding joy because they realize that genuine contentment depends on God's grace, not earthly wealth. Yeah, I have everything I need, but not spiritually speaking. Only God can fill that hole. Only Jesus can fill that hole in my life. Pain has this way of grounding us. And I'm going to wrap up this whole context of pain of chapter 1 with three thoughts that kind of come out of the whole context. Number one is faith takes us back to our faith. When things are going well, we can get lazy. Right? We can't get spiritually lazy, not be so much on edge. Maybe we don't pray as much as we know we could or as we think we should. Maybe we don't read the Bible all that much as we could or should. We find reasons not to go to Bible studies or small groups or whatever. We're hit and miss on Sunday morning. You wake up, you're like, it's snowy, I think I'll stay home, or whatever. We just get kind of lazy in our faith. And then something happens that causes pain in our life. What does it do? It wakes us up immediately. Immediately, like, I need to pray. Why am I not praying? I should be praying about this. And you start praying, and you start reading the Bible more, and all of a sudden, you find yourself wanting to connect with God in a higher way. You start thinking, I need God back in my life. I need to put him more in the center of what I'm doing. And you start reaching out to God. But as soon as the pain goes away, what do we do? Because we're all human, we start kind of backing off a little bit. So our spiritual life, most of us are probably something kind of like this. And hopefully, at least in the pain, we grow a little bit more, and it's more of an upward swing, but that's how it tends to go. Wouldn't it be better for all of us if we figured out how to stay connected at a higher level without the pain? I mean, it'd be better, but it doesn't always happen. It's possible, and I would recommend being involved in a small group, being involved in a study group, taking part in the Sunday school class at 9 o'clock on Sundays for the adults. That's Bible study. It's getting content, not trying to drain the first service, but you guys still have room, don't you? There's room. There's room. Brian's your teacher, and he would attest to the fact they have room for you in there. But do things that will stretch your faith, that will grow your faith. Figure out a pattern to pray. Just do it. Just do it. I mean, just make yourself pray. Don't wait till things are going poorly. Follow some type of Bible reading plan. There's all kinds of them out there. Some take short little clips of scripture, like, hey, I'm reading through James. Consider it pure joy. When you're facing trials of any kinds, you think, I'm going to stop and rest on that. and it's good. You need that part of your life where you can meditate on a particular verse. Or some of them are like the Bible through the year plan. Actually, I think both have a place because that gives you the big picture. So when you read a little piece, you get an idea of the bigger context of where it's at. So you should have done both in your life. But on the flyover, when you're reading the whole Bible in a year, you'll read something like James and just kind of check it off the list and move on. And so you got to be careful of that. So that's why I say both. Don't do one without the other. You need to get those nuggets of spiritual growth in your life. You can do that without pain, but pain will draw you to it if you don't. And you'll start looking those verses up and researching them. Second benefit of pain, it reminds us of our future. Again, things are going great. You don't think a whole lot about it. You don't think about eternity. You're thinking about other stuff. I'm thinking about my bank account. How much do I have in savings now? How much am I, where's my budget doing this or that? You're thinking about your next project at work or the next vacation you have planned. I actually typed that sentence as I was preparing to leave for Florida. That wasn't a vacation, but it was just a vacation place for sure. Everybody else was on vacation there. I was there for work. But when pain enters your life, you're reminded of your mortality. Life isn't just a beautiful, paradise. It's like life will end one of these days, and it reminds us of our future, that our future's better as believers. Every funeral I've ever done is filled with a lot of people whose eyes have that look of like mortality, of the depth of what is happening. And what we're talking about in that service is life has ended. And somewhere in everybody's heart, they're thinking, man, it's going to happen for me someday. Even though they're trying to not think about it, you can see it on their face. They understand the depth of what's happening. For the follower of Christ, that's good news. I will someday die, and I'll breathe my last, and I'm going to try to stay as long as I can, but when I do go, it's going to be great. I mean, it's going to be great. It's going to be better than anything here. It reminds us of that. A lot of you weren't here when this happened, and a lot of you were, so I'm not getting into great detail, but a few years ago, I had to get a cough every year. This is what I do, and my body is part of that weakness of the human body condition. Several years ago, I went in for my cough, and it was one of those things, one thing led to another. They took my blood pressure, like, oh, it seems higher than it should be. And they're looking at records, look at you. You should, maybe we should check this closer. And then they did the EKG, and then they sent me to a cardiologist, and then I did the treadmill, and then they did an MRI, and then they still couldn't figure out, like, the heart, everything was like, everything's great, but there's still something, I want to look at this a little closer. And they shove a camera down my throat, and then they say, here's the deal, you have an aneurysm, you're going to die any minute. Stop lifting weights. This is when we're doing stuff in downtown too, and I was like, don't lift anything over 10 pounds, stop running. So I'm like, well, I'm not running, so that's, life change of all kinds. We're going to send you to a surgeon, and then we'll get this thing taken care of before you die. And that's a pretty deep thing to hear, from a cardiologist. And so you go to the cardiologist, and he's like, oh, yeah, man, you're going to die any minute. This is terrible. You're awful. You're in bad shape. And let's wait a year and see if it grows. I'm going, in an aneurysm, if it grows, it pops, you die. I mean, that's how that works. That's kind of what it is. It's a balloon in the middle of an artery. So that made me a little nervous. I thought, okay. Because you'll find someone who will do the surgery if you keep asking, because I just don't think we should do it yet. And so we get in the car. I'm like, we went into that meeting expecting a date for a surgery, and it was like, let's wait a year. We went back a year later, but that year was the year that every night I went to bed, I thought this could be it. They were really pouring it on, like, this is serious. Don't do anything normal. And so every night I went to bed, and I was like, well, God, I might see you next time I open my eyes. Could be in your presence. Thanks for another day. And it made me think of my future a lot. I mean, it was in the top of everything. And so I go back at that year anniversary, and they're like, didn't we say you had an aneurysm? And I'm like, well, yeah. I was like, well, it's not there. It's not there. It's I don't know what to tell you. And I go back to the cardiologist, and I give you guys all credit, because you've all prayed like fervently for it, because I was probably whining about it or something, and like, I'm going to die, I probably reminded that every time in a conversation, basically, he said, this only can be explained as a medical miracle. There's no physical way that could have happened, but it did. And I just said, well, God does what he wants, and smiled and went on my way. But since then, that's been several years ago, they keep testing every year just to make sure, like, something's not, a bad test or something. And I don't know, 6 months ago I took the thing again, and they're like, well, it shrunk for me. I mean, it's like, you're great, everything's wonderful. Wow. But see, that was a trial I went through. It was very real, and it made me think of future a lot. It brought me to the future and wondering what heaven's going to be like, and I thought about that quite literally every day. It's just what it does. It's no wonder James says in verse 12, blessed is the man who remains steadfast under trial, for when he has stood the test, he'll receive the crown of glory which God has promised to those who love him. See, it didn't matter how much money I made or didn't make. That's just something was going on with my body at the time. And it was like, you're going to withstand this trial? You're going to run? Are you going to be mad at God and run? Or are you going to face it and just see what happens? And, I just faced it. Last thing, it grounds us in our purpose, and we have pain. I believe the only reason we're still here, any of us, is that God has purpose for us. I mean, why doesn't he just, we accept Christ and says, good, and take you to heaven? You know, wouldn't that be, save us a lot? It might be a lot less baptisms that way, but I mean, why are we here? Why are we sticking around waiting for him to return or us to go to him, whichever's first? I believe because he has a purpose for everybody, every soul in this building. It may be to reach that family member in your family that nobody else can reach, but you can. It could be that. It might be that person at work that only you can reach, and nobody else is there who will say anything or do anything or reach out to them, and that's why he has you still here. It could be to encourage a fellow believer in the faith that they're going through some struggle, and you've gone through that same struggle, and you can reach out to them and say, hey, here's how this helped. Here's how I grew through this. Here's how God was there the whole time. Let me encourage you. It could be to do that for somebody else, something he wants you to pass on spiritually to another person. Whatever it is, you're a vital part of God's plan. You absolutely are. And sometimes it takes pain in your life to kind of shake you out of your comfort zone and remind you, I should be doing something beyond just sitting here going to church. I should be actually engaged in kingdom work. I should be doing things. And pain will remind us to stop wasting valuable time doing needless things and be engaged in eternal kingdom work. All right, so we close this series, not the series, but the section of pain up from chapter 1. Let me just encourage you, when you go through the various trials in life, to embrace the suffering. Because you might be thinking, I'm not in suffering now, you will later. You just know it. You know, that's a cycle of things just happen, right? And when it happens, embrace it. If you're struggling, embrace it. You pray for wisdom. Allow it to put you back in context. Whatever God wants to do in this, allow him to do it. Allow him to work in your life. Allow him space to move in your heart. And let it grow you and challenge you to the next level of your faith. And hopefully it will ultimately lead to worship.